picture a rock and roll pioneer in your mind. Just visualize that archetype for a second.
Right, the classic image.
Yeah. What comes to mind? You are probably picturing someone, I don't know, thrashing around on a stage.
Smashing a guitar into an amplifier.
Exactly. Wearing something completely outrageous and just screaming these rebellious anti-establishment anthems designed specifically to terrify the older generation.
The whole teenage rebellion pack.
Right. Now, I want you to take that image and completely erase it from your brain.
Just wipe it clean.
Replace it with a man standing stock still at a microphone. He doesn't dance.
Not a single hip thrust.
None. He doesn't write songs about teenage rebellion or hot rods. He wears thick, dark prescription glasses, dresses entirely in black, and, frankly, looks a lot more like a shy bank teller.
Or an insurance salesman.
Yeah, an insurance salesman than a global rock star, anyway. Yet, this is the very same guy who somehow had the Beatles opening for him at the absolute height of their early fame.
Which is still hard to wrap my head around.
It is wild. This is the guy who could sing a high A note so impossibly clear and with such terrifying power that seasoned professional studio musicians would literally stop playing their instruments in sheer shock.
It completely shatters the mythology we've built around the birth of rock and roll.
It really does.
We are so conditioned to associate that era with aggressive, hip-shaking extroversion, but then you have this entirely singular figure who conquered the world by doing the exact opposite.
It's unbelievable when you really look at it. We are, of course, talking about the life, the absolutely devastating tragedies, and the unparalleled voice of Roy Orbison.
An absolute legend.
I am so excited to get into this material today because whether you are a hardcore music history buff who reads every liner note from the 1960s, or you are just insanely curious about pop culture and how legends are actually constructed behind the scenes, this journey is going to completely fascinate you.
The word constructed is perfect there.
Yeah.
Orbison is one of those historical figures who seems almost mythological now.
Yeah, definitely.
And that is largely because he simply refused to fit into any of the convenient prepackaged boxes that the music industry of his era tried to shove him into. He created his own box.
We are basing today's deep dive on a single, incredibly comprehensive biographical and historical source. It covers his entire life, his technical musical innovations, and his cultural legacy.
It's a fantastic resource.
Our mission today is to figure out exactly how a shy, severely self-conscious kid from the dusty, rough-and-tumble oil towns of West Texas completely redefined what masculinity meant in popular music.
And ultimately earned the nickname the Caruso of Rock.
Okay, let's unpack this.
To really understand Orbison's legacy, we have to look closely at the massive, almost unbelievable contradictions that defined his existence.
Right.
His story is a profound study in extremes. You have a life marked by unimaginable, almost biblical levels of personal tragedy, but that is paired with soaring, transcendent artistic triumph.
It's just extreme highs and extreme lows.
Exactly. You have a man who achieved global, iconic fame, yet who possessed an intense, almost crippling shyness. So as we go through this material, we aren't just going to look at a chronological list of hit songs.
We need to dig deeper than that.
We need to dig deep into the psychological reasons of why he sang them and how his completely unique approach to male vulnerability quite literally changed the trajectory of popular music forever.
So to get to the root of that why, we have to go back to the very beginning. Let's travel to April 1936 in Vernon, Texas.
Deep in the heart of Texas.
Yeah. Roy Kelton Orbison is born into a world that is not exactly glamorous or, nurturing for an artist. His father was an oil field driller.
Just a guy struggling to find steady work right on the heels of the Great Depression.
Exactly. The family eventually moved around quite a bit, ending up in these rough, gritty Texas towns like Fort Worth, and eventually a place called Wink.
Wink, Texas?
Wink. The source material has a quote from Orbison himself describing Wink as a place of football, oil fields, oil, grease, and sand.
That paints a very specific picture.
Right. When you picture that environment, it's essentially a rugged, hyper-masculine frontier town, not exactly a place where a sensitive, artistic kid is going to thrive.
The environment was incredibly tough, and it was uniquely isolating for a kid who didn't fit the expected mold. From the time he was 4 years old, Orbison was plagued by severely poor eyesight.
Right.
He was forced to wear these incredibly thick, heavy glasses just to see anything. He was deeply self-conscious about his appearance and severely lacked any real sporting ability.
Which in Texas is a big deal.
Oh, in a Texas town where high school football is essentially a religion, being unathletic immediately makes you an outsider. Furthermore, he had this naturally almost white dishwater gray hair.
Which just made him stand out even more.
It made him feel so physically awkward and anomalous that he started dyeing it jet black from a very young age. He was just attempting to blend in, or at least gain some sort of control over how the world perceived him.
It's a heartbreaking image to picture, honestly. The historical accounts give us this vivid scene of a young Roy playing his guitar completely by himself during school recess.
Just sitting against a wall.
Yeah, sitting against a wall while all the other kids were out running around playing physical games. His dad had actually given him a guitar for his 6th birthday.
And his dad and brother taught him a few chords.
Right. And by the time he was 7 years old, he famously said he was finished for anything else. Music became his entire universe. He even formed a band called the Wink Westerners when he was just 13.
Playing country, western swing, and traditional jazz standards at local honky-tonks.
But before that, there was a specific early moment that the source material points to as setting the emotional tone for his entire career.
That moment serves as a crucial psychological anchor for him. During World War II, when the family was living in Fort Worth, a young Roy would frequently attend these regular community singing sessions.
Right, because his family was very involved in that.
Exactly. And because it was wartime, the room would be packed with young soldiers who were about to ship out to the front lines.
Oh, wow.
These men were facing their own mortality. They were leaving their wives and children behind, possibly forever. The atmosphere in those rooms was thick with intense, raw, utterly uninhibited male emotion.
So he's just sitting there taking this all in.
Yes. You had grown men drinking, singing these old traditional songs at the top of their lungs and weeping openly, witnessing adult men completely dropping their stoic facades and displaying that level of emotional devastation profoundly shaped Orbison's understanding of what music could actually do.
That makes so much sense.
He realized very early on that music wasn't just background entertainment for a dance. It was a vessel for the deepest human pain and longing.
Which is wild to think about when you consider how incredibly shy he was.
Right.
He's this quiet, polite, self-effacing kid who is basically using the guitar as a physical shield to hide behind during recess. But at the exact same time, he's using that exact same instrument to thrust himself directly into the public eye.
I mean, he had his own local radio show by the time he was 8 years old.
8. It is the ultimate performer's paradox. The guitar acts as a literal barrier between his physical insecurities and the outside world.
But it also becomes his only viable bridge to that world.
Exactly. It allowed him to communicate the massive, complex emotions he was observing, things he could never articulate in casual, day-to-day conversation.
It gave him a voice, literally and figuratively.
The real pivot, though, the moment he moves away from traditional country and western swing, happens at a New Year's Eve dance in 1954.
This is a great story.
The Wink Westerners are playing their usual gig, doing the country stuff they always did. But at the end of the night, they decide to just play Bill Haley and the Comets' Shake, Rattle, and Roll.
They play it repeatedly.
Repeatedly, and the crowd absolutely goes wild for it.
They'd never heard anything like it live.
Combine that reaction with another pivotal moment detailed in the source, where a young Orbison sees an early regional performance by Elvis Presley.
Before Elvis was a global phenomenon.
Right. Orbison was completely shocked by Elvis's gyrations, his raw sexual energy on stage, and the frenzy it caused in the crowd. Suddenly, rock and roll is the undeniable path forward.
It was a revelation.
I want you, listening right now, to just think about your own childhood insecurities for a second. Think about how often the very things that make us feel alienated.
Maybe you were too shy?
Or you had a physical limitation, or you just felt like you don't speak the same language as your peers.
Right.
Think about how those things become the exact catalyst for our greatest, most unique strengths. Orbison's terrible eyesight and lack of athleticism literally pushed him into an isolated corner with a guitar.
And that lonely corner became the foundation of a global empire.
Because he couldn't compete on the football field, he poured every ounce of his competitive drive and focus into the fretboard of that guitar.
And that obsession leads us directly to his first real professional detour in the music industry, the rockabilly era.
Right, so let's track this evolution. Orbison decides to drop out of college. He had initially tried studying geology, figuring he could fall back on working in the oil fields like his dad.
A pragmatic choice for West Texas.
And then he switched to history and English, but he was just bored. So he renames his band the Teen Kings, and they head into a studio.
Norman Petty's studio.
Right, Norman Petty's studio, to record a catchy, fairly simple rockabilly track called Ooby Dooby. Eventually, this track makes its way into the hands of the legendary Sam Phillips at Sun Records in Memphis.
And we have to set the scene for what Sun Records was at this exact moment in time. Sun Records was the absolute epicenter of the rock and roll explosion.
The ground zero.
Elvis Presley had just left Sun for a much more lucrative contract at RCA, and Sam Phillips, the owner and producer, was frantically scouring the earth trying to find the next Elvis.
He needed a new hip-shaking rebel.
Exactly. So when he heard the raw energy of Ooby Dooby, he immediately brought the Teen Kings into the studio.
And from the outside, it sort of looks like a massive success story initially. They get a hit, the song actually charts, and it sells a couple 100,000 copies.
A huge deal for a kid from Wink.
Orbison gets his very first royalty check and immediately goes out and buys a brand new purple Cadillac.
And a diamond ring.
And a diamond ring. He starts touring the southern United States. But the gigs themselves sound bizarre.
Really bizarre.
The source notes they were literally playing on the roofs of projection houses at drive-in theaters between movies.
Touring alongside guys like Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins.
It sounds like this glamorous, rebellious rock and roll lifestyle, but the historical reality was brutally different, wasn't it?
It was an incredibly punishing existence. Let's look at the financial and physical realities of the 1950s music business. It was highly exploitative, especially for young, unproven artists.
Because the contracts were terrible?
The contracts that bands like the Teen Kings signed usually didn't include what we call BMI radio royalties.
Wait, can you explain how that royalty structure actually worked back then? Why is that detail so important?
Absolutely. Today, when a song plays on the radio, both the songwriter and the performer get paid a royalty. But in the 1950s, the performance royalty structure was incredibly weak or non-existent for these new rock artists.
So they weren't getting a cut of the airplay.
Exactly. It meant that even if Ooby Dooby was playing on 100 radio stations across the South, Orbison and his band weren't making money while they slept.
Man, that's brutal.
They only made money from physical record sales.
Which the label took the lion's share of, I'm sure.
Of course, and from grueling live shows. So to actually eat, they had to stay on the road constantly.
And playing on the roof of a drive-in theater in the middle of the summer in the South doesn't exactly sound like a premium concert experience.
It was miserable. Imagine standing on a flat tar roof in 90-degree heat, fighting off mosquitoes. Playing through terrible, distorted public address systems designed for movie dialogue, not live music. The paychecks barely covered the gas for the cars.
So that overnight wealth
The purple Cadillac.
was a complete illusion.
It almost immediately turned back into grinding poverty. The band ultimately breaks up over money disputes and bruised egos, and Orbison finds himself entirely broke.
But there was also a fundamental creative clash happening at Sun Records, right? Why couldn't Orbison just crank out more rockabilly hits for Sam Phillips?
Because of the stylistic demands Sam Phillips was making. Phillips demanded upbeat, frantic, aggressive rockabilly. To achieve that sound, Sun Records famously used a technique called slapback echo.
I've heard that term thrown around a lot in music documentaries, but what does slapback echo actually mean to the listener?
If you listen to early Elvis, like Heartbreak Hotel or That's All Right, you hear his voice rapidly repeating immediately after he sings a word.
Like a fast echo.
Like a very fast, sharp echo bouncing off a canyon wall. That's slapback. It creates a sense of frantic, nervous energy. It makes the singers sound wild and untamed.
But that wasn't Roy.
Not at all. Orbison's heart was always in sweeping, emotional, melodic ballads. He wasn't a natural shouter. He didn't have that untamed, aggressive energy.
So the effect just didn't work for him.
The slapback echo just muddied his pure vocal tone. He felt creatively stifled.
And things get incredibly dark for him during this period. He's stuck in Memphis, completely broke, and the touring schedule is so grueling that he becomes addicted to sleeping pills just to come down at night.
And speed just to wake up and perform the next day.
The source gives us this incredibly surreal, pathetic image. Orbison, penniless, high on pills, driving around Memphis in his purple Cadillac.
Literally acting as a chauffeur.
Yeah, picking up dates for Elvis Presley because he had nothing else going on.
It's just a stunning fall from grace.
He had met his future first wife, Claudette, at a dance back in Texas when she was just 14. And eventually he just gives up, moves back to Texas to be with her, and essentially abandons the idea of being a recording artist.
What's fascinating here is he had completely failed as a solo act for Sun Records because the label simply wouldn't allow him to be who he authentically was.
They tried to force a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly. There is a famous anecdote where Jack Clements, a key producer at Sun, straight up told Orbison to his face that he would never, ever make it as a ballad singer.
Wow.
But when you look at the arc of his life, that failure was utterly necessary.
How so?
It forcefully stripped away his attempt to be a second-rate Elvis Presley and pushed him toward finding the sound that only he could produce.
Which brings us to the next chapter, Nashville, and the discovery of what Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees would later call the voice of God.
A perfect description.
After leaving Sun Records, Orbison has to make a living, so he starts writing songs for other people. He writes a song called Claudette, named after his wife, for the Everly Brothers.
And it becomes a massive hit.
This gets him a staff writing job at Acuff Rose Music in Nashville. He is just grinding out songs every single day.
He actually had to sit in his car to write them.
Because he was living in a tiny, cramped apartment with Claudette and their new baby, and there was no quiet space. But then he signs with a new label, Monument Records, and he meets a producer named Fred Foster.
Monument Records is the crucial turning point in music history for Orbison.
It changes everything.
At Monument, he teams up with Foster, a truly brilliant audio engineer named Bill Porter, and a songwriter named Joe Melson. Together, this team begins constructing a sound that was the polar opposite of that raw, slapback echo of Sun Records.
How did it sound different?
It was meticulously polished, highly professional, and crucially, it utilized lush, classical string arrangements instead of standard country western fiddles.
Okay, so then comes the year 1960. Orbison and Melson write a song called Only the Lonely. And there's a hilarious side note here.
The Graceland story.
Yes. Orbison actually drove out to Elvis Presley's house, Graceland, to pitch him this song. He was just trying to make a quick buck by getting the biggest star in the world to record his track.
Which is pretty logical.
But he showed up early in the morning, and Elvis's entourage told him the king was sleeping and didn't want to see anybody.
Just shut the door on him.
So Orbison leaves. Thank goodness for that rejection, because Orbison ends up recording it himself at RCA Victor's famous Nashville studio. And the audio engineering on this session is legendary in the industry.
Bill Porter's work here is iconic.
I know it's often referred to as top-down mixing, but what does that actually mean for the everyday listener putting on a pair of headphones?
It's a brilliant technical shift. Normally, when an engineer mixes a rock or pop song, they build it from the bottom up.
Okay.
That means they start by making the bass guitar and the kick drum really loud and punchy, establishing a heavy rhythmic foundation.
Yeah.
And then they layer the guitars and vocals on top of that.
Standard rock and roll sound.
Right. Bill Porter completely revolutionized this. He flipped the formula. He built the mix from the top down. He focused entirely on the high frequencies first.
Ah, I see.
He put Orbison's close-mic'd vocals and the shimmering backing singers right up in the foreground, right against your ear. Then he layered the sweeping strings just behind that. Finally, he tucked the rhythm section.
The drums and the bass.
Yes, very softly in the background. It completely removed the aggressive thump of rock and roll and created a floating, cinematic, almost symphonic atmosphere.
A completely different vibe.
It was a sonic cradle designed perfectly for Orbison's voice.
And oh my goodness, that voice. It is during these specific Monument sessions that Orbison finally realizes his voice isn't just a good country tenor.
It is a musical instrument of terrifying operatic power.
He and Joe Melson literally start constructing their songs entirely around showcasing his massive vocal range. And nowhere is this incredible realization more evident than during the recording of his first #1 hit, Running Scared, in 1961.
That session is legendary.
I know they were recording this song live in the studio with a full orchestra, but how do you capture a voice that quiet and delicate over a room full of blasting horns and strings in 1961?
It was a massive logistical problem. The studio story of Running Scared is an absolute masterclass in problem solving.
Because they couldn't just overdub him later.
Right. They had to get it all in the room. The song itself is structured to build constant, unrelenting tension. It's about a man who is utterly terrified that his current girlfriend is going to leave him for her former lover.
The music just builds and builds.
In this continuous suspenseful loop getting louder and louder, because they were recording the vocals and the orchestra in the same room at the same time, the sheer volume of the orchestra was bleeding into Orbison's microphone.
And completely drowning him out.
Exactly. Furthermore, as the orchestra swelled at the climax of the song, Orbison simply couldn't project loudly enough to hit the highest note in his usual breathy falsetto. His voice kept breaking under the strain.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The producer, Fred Foster, has to completely improvise on the spot. He literally drags Orbison into the far corner of the recording studio and builds a makeshift isolation booth,
Out of whatever he can find.
which happens to be a bunch of wooden coat racks.
Yes, literal coat racks.
Draped with heavy coats and blankets, he boxes Orbison in just to try and physically block the sound waves of the blasting horns from hitting Orbison's vocal mic.
It's incredible to think of a masterpiece being recorded inside a fort made of coats.
So they are in this makeshift setup. They do take one. It's not great. They do take two. Still not happy with the climax. Then they roll tape on the third take.
The magic take.
As they approach that massive, terrifying crescendo of the song, Orbison makes a split-second instinctual decision. He decides to completely abandon his delicate falsetto.
He just goes for it.
He opens his throat and goes for the final soaring high A note in his full, natural chest voice. And he sings it with such staggering, overwhelming hurricane force power that the seasoned studio musicians in the room...
And these are guys who have seen and heard absolutely everything.
Right. They are so shocked by the sheer physical force of the note that they literally stop playing their instruments.
Just dead in their tracks.
There is just total stunned silence in the room as the note rings out. They finish the song on that exact take.
It's a seminal moment in music history because nobody had heard anything quite like it in popular music.
It wasn't just technically impressive to hit a high note.
No, it was a high note delivered with the emotional weight and density of a collapsing star. It was pure opera transposed into a 3-minute pop single.
I really want you to think about that for a second. Imagine being in that studio room. Imagine having a latent, world-shifting talent hidden deep inside of you that you didn't even fully understand or recognize until you were pushed to your absolute physical and emotional limit.
That's a powerful thought.
Orbison later referred to this moment as the flowering of his voice. I want you to consider what untapped talents you might have buried away, just waiting for the right kind of pressure or the right isolation booth to force you to finally break out and shock everyone around you.
That is a wonderful way to contextualize his breakthrough. And once that voice flowered, it catapulted him to an unprecedented level of international fame.
He was everywhere.
From 1960 through 1964, Roy Orbison was undisputedly one of the biggest names in the global entertainment industry.
Which brings us to a massive cultural shift, the British invasion.
A huge turning point for everyone in the industry.
This was a cultural tsunami led by bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones that systematically wiped out the chart success of almost every single American rock artist of Orbison's generation.
Buddy Holly was gone, Elvis was making bad movies, and the British bands were dominating.
But not Roy.
Not Roy.
In 1963, he travels to the United Kingdom for a massive tour. Now, he was originally just supposed to replace the guitarist Duane Eddy on this bill, but by the time he arrives, he finds himself co-headlining with a new, rapidly rising local band called the Beatles.
And the demand is so high that the entire tour sells out in a single afternoon.
When you visualize the contrast between the Beatles and Roy Orbison on that tour, it is absolutely delicious.
It's the ultimate odd couple.
You have the Fab Four, who are young, bouncing around the stage, shaking their mop tops, brimming with cheeky charm, and inciting absolute deafening riots among thousands of teenage girls.
Total chaos.
And then, standing in the opposite corner, you have Orbison. The backstage dynamic alone is incredible.
Oh, the John Lennon interaction.
Yes. We get this story where Orbison arrives in the UK, realizes he's sharing the top billing with these young kids he's never heard of, and feeling a bit annoyed, he asks out loud to the room, "What's a Beatle anyway?"
And John Lennon, who is standing right behind him, just taps him on the shoulder and dryly says, "I am."
Classic Lennon. But it's the opening night of the tour where the legend of Roy Orbison is truly cemented in stone. Orbison is scheduled to go on before the Beatles. He walks out onto the stage. He is dressed entirely in black.
And he's wearing these thick, dark prescription sunglasses.
Why? Because he had famously left his regular, clear prescription glasses on an airplane seat earlier that day.
And because he was practically blind without them, he just decided to wear his prescription Ray-Ban sunglasses on stage so he wouldn't trip over the microphone cables.
It wasn't a fashion statement at all.
Purely practical.
He steps up to the mic. He stands completely motionless. He doesn't dance. He doesn't smile at the crowd. He doesn't engage in any stage banter.
He was incredibly self-aware. He later said in interviews that he knew he didn't have a super personality like a Chubby Checker or an Elvis.
He couldn't charm a crowd with winks and hip thrusts.
Exactly. He knew, fundamentally, that the people in those seats came purely to hear the songs. He let the architecture of the music do all the heavy lifting.
And boy, did he deliver on that promise. He plays his set, standing like a statue, and the British audience goes absolutely feral.
The Beatles are standing backstage, peeking through the curtain, just dumbfounded by what they're witnessing.
Ringo Starr later talked extensively about how genuinely shocked they were that a guy doing absolutely nothing physical on stage was generating this level of mass hysteria.
It defied all rock and roll logic.
Orbison plays his set, and the crowd demands an encore. Then another. He ends up playing 14 encores.
14.
14. The crowd is just relentlessly chanting, "We want Roy, we want Roy." The frenzy is so intense that finally John Lennon and Paul McCartney have to physically grab Orbison by the arms.
Literally hold him back in the wings.
So he can't walk out for a 15th encore just so the Beatles could finally get a chance to play their own show.
It proves definitively that pure, concentrated emotional resonance can rival and even overpower the most meticulously crafted teen idol persona.
And his statistical success during this period is staggering when you look at the historical data.
Oh, absolutely. The British invasion was destroying the careers of his American peers. But in the specific 68-week period spanning 1963 and 1964, Roy Orbison was the only American artist to achieve a #1 single in Britain.
The only one.
He was completely impervious to the shifting trends because his music operated on a deeper, more universal emotional frequency.
And it was during this exact peak of his career that he wrote his most iconic, universally recognizable song. And it happened almost entirely by accident.
A great accident.
He is sitting at home in Tennessee, writing with his frequent collaborator, Bill Dees. His wife, Claudette, pokes her head into the room to say she's heading out to do some shopping down in Nashville.
And Orbison, being a good husband, asks if she needs him to give her any money.
Bill Dees, without missing a beat, casually replies, "A pretty woman never needs any money."
Bam, the phrase just hangs in the air.
Orbison immediately starts playing this driving, descending guitar riff. He remembers a playful, purring growl he heard in a Bob Hope comedy movie and adds it to the vocal track.
And in exactly 40 minutes, start to finish, they write, "Oh, Pretty Woman."
A masterpiece of pop construction that goes on to sell over 7 million copies.
It represents the absolute pinnacle of his commercial and creative career in the 1960s. But as we often see in these sweeping biographical arcs, the higher the peak, the more devastating the eventual fall.
And this is where we need to slow down, because the story takes a turn that is genuinely hard to stomach. The sheer volume of tragedies that befall Roy Orbison in the subsequent years is almost unthinkable.
It really is.
We start to see the professional foundation wobble first. Riding high on the success of Pretty Woman, he signs a massive $1 million contract with MGM Records.
A huge deal at the time.
The executives at MGM had this bright idea that they were going to turn Orbison into a leading Hollywood movie star, exactly like they did with Elvis Presley.
When you consider who Roy Orbison was as an artist, the absurdity of this corporate strategy cannot be overstated.
It's laughable.
They tried to take this deeply mysterious, operatic, profoundly sorrowful figure and aggressively cram him into a goofy, lighthearted Elvis-style mold.
They cast him in a movie called The Fastest Guitar Alive. The plot is ridiculous. Orbison plays a singing Civil War spy who carries a guitar that literally transforms into a functioning rifle.
It was entirely antithetical to his authentic persona. Unsurprisingly, it was a critical and commercial disaster.
On top of that, the label forced him to churn out studio albums at a completely unsustainable pace to meet contractual obligations.
And the quality of his music predictably suffered.
But the professional decline he was experiencing at MGM was absolutely nothing compared to the nightmare his personal life was becoming. His marriage to Claudette was deeply troubled for years.
There was well-documented infidelity on both sides.
In one particularly painful instance, Claudette had a long-standing affair with the contractor who was physically building their dream home while Roy was away on those grueling international tours.
The strain leads to divorce.
But their connection was so deep that they eventually reconcile and remarry. Now, they both share this intense, adrenaline-fueled love for motorcycles, a hobby that Elvis had actually introduced them to back in the 50s.
Roy loves speed. He drove a Ferrari. He rode a Harley-Davidson.
But on a June afternoon in 1966, while they were riding their motorcycles together down a highway in Tennessee, a pickup truck pulled out in front of them. Claudette struck the truck and was killed instantly.
She was only 25 years old.
It completely shattered him.
To watch the woman he had loved since she was a teenager die violently right in front of him broke something fundamental inside of him. Initially, he tried to cope by throwing himself obsessively into his work, trying to outrun the grief through constant touring.
But the tragedy didn't stop there.
If we connect this to the bigger picture and our broader understanding of human trauma, we see that the compounding nature of his grief simply became too heavy for his mind to process.
Because just 2 years later, in September 1968, while he was on tour in England trying to keep his career afloat, he received a phone call.
His home in Tennessee had burned to the ground.
His two eldest sons, Roy Duane and Anthony King, were trapped inside the house and perished in the fire.
It's just beyond comprehension.
There are really no words to adequately describe that level of loss. To lose the love of your life and then your two young boys, all in the span of roughly 24 months.
When you read through the historical accounts of this specific time in his life, you realize the psychological pain was so heavy, so suffocating, that he literally couldn't pick up a pen.
The creative well just entirely dried up.
He stopped writing hits. He essentially became a ghost, living in the shell of a rock star.
And this devastating personal retreat leads directly to what Life magazine brilliantly termed his era as the anonymous celebrity.
This is a fascinating cultural phenomenon, because Orbison had never cultivated a flashy, attention-seeking public persona.
And because he constantly hid his face behind those dark glasses,
Right.
wore featureless black clothing.
The broader public didn't really know him as a three-dimensional human being. He didn't have a massive PR machine constantly feeding tabloids with his drama.
So when the massive counterculture movement of the late 60s and 70s hit, when aggressive psychedelic rock from Jimi Hendrix, The Doors, and Jefferson Airplane completely took over the zeitgeist,
Orbison, just quietly, almost invisibly, faded into the background. It was incredibly easy for him to disappear from the public consciousness because he was already visually and emotionally obscured.
he spends the entire decade of the 1970s playing the cabaret circuit and county fairs to mostly empty arenas. There is a particularly sad detail in the source where he played a show in Cincinnati on his 40th birthday to almost nobody.
And his physical health severely deteriorated as well.
He suffered from debilitating stomach ulcers, and because he had been a heavy chain smoker since he was a teenager, his heart began to fail. In 1978, he had to undergo triple bypass open heart surgery because he was quite literally barely alive.
But amidst all this darkness, he did find a crucial anchor of personal stability. In 1968, shortly before the fire, he had met a German teenager named Barbara while touring in Leeds.
They married, and she eventually helped him rebuild a semblance of a normal family life, having 2 more sons together.
And despite the utter catastrophic collapse of his career, he maintained this incredibly profound, resilient outlook on his place in the world.
He was once asked about surviving the changing trends, and he said he just stood there, quote, like a tree where the winds blow and the seasons change and you're still there and you bloom again.
That quote is the absolute essence of his survival mechanism. He didn't chase trends. He didn't try to record a disco album. He just planted his feet and waited out the storm.
And as we move into the 1980s, the cultural winds finally began to change back in his favor.
And this comeback is just as unbelievable as his fall from grace.
It doesn't happen overnight. It starts slowly, organically. Other prominent artists start covering his classic songs and having massive chart-topping hits with them.
Don McLean records a beautiful version of Crying that goes to #1 in the UK.
Van Halen does a blistering hard rock cover of Oh, Pretty Woman. Linda Ronstadt records a soaring cover of Blue Bayou.
Suddenly, a whole new generation of teenagers is hearing these masterful melodies on the radio.
But the real, undeniable cultural earthquake happens in 1986, and it comes from a completely unexpected source, a fiercely independent filmmaker named David Lynch.
Lynch's use of Orbison's sweeping ballad In Dreams in his neo-noir psychological thriller Blue Velvet is widely considered one of the most brilliant, unsettling, and transformative musical placements in the history of cinema.
If you haven't seen it, the actor Dennis Hopper plays this terrifying, deeply psychopathic, gas-huffing drug dealer named Frank Booth.
In a pivotal, deeply disturbing scene, another character in a brothel lip-syncs in dreams into a harsh industrial work light, acting as a microphone, while Booth watches, completely transfixed, weeping, and emotionally unhinged by the music.
When Orbison first saw the movie, he was absolutely mortified.
I can imagine.
Imagine sitting in a movie theater in Malibu, expecting a standard Hollywood film, and suddenly you were watching your beautiful, sweeping, romantic ballad being used as the emotional centerpiece to a deeply disturbing, violent, underworld drug scene. He was initially furious.
But as time passed, he eventually realized what Lynch had actually accomplished.
Right. By placing that pure operatic song in such a dark context, Lynch gave the music this surreal, haunting, otherworldly quality.
It completely stripped away the safe 1960s oldies radio nostalgia and revealed the dark, obsessive psychological underbelly of Orbison's lyrics.
It was a masterstroke of rebranding, entirely orchestrated by Lynch.
It reintroduced Roy Orbison not as a nostalgic heritage act playing county fairs, but as a dangerous avant-garde artist. It made him cool, edgy, and deeply mysterious to the MTV generation who thrived on dark aesthetics.
And once that door was open, the validation from the industry just kept pouring in. In 1987, Bruce Springsteen inducts him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Springsteen gives this incredible speech where he famously says he went into the studio wanting to make records that sounded like Phil Spector. He wanted to write lyrics that sounded like Bob Dylan.
But most of all, more than anything, he desperately wanted to sing like Roy Orbison.
But the absolute crown jewel of this 1980s comeback has to be the formation of the Traveling Wilburys.
The Wilburys represent the ultimate, indisputable validation from his absolute highest level peers. You have George Harrison of the Beatles, Bob Dylan, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne of ELO.
These are, without exaggeration, arguably the most successful, critically acclaimed, and influential rock songwriters on planet Earth.
And they essentially decide to form a supergroup largely just as an excuse to hang out or record with Roy Orbison. The story of how the supergroup actually formed sounds like a Hollywood script, but it's completely true.
They all get together on a whim in a single day in California.
They meet for lunch, and George Harrison mentions he needs to quickly record a B-side for a European single. They realize they don't have a guitar, so they pop over to Tom Petty's house to grab one, and he ends up joining them.
Then they head over to Bob Dylan's house, because he has a recording studio in his garage.
They sit around, and in a matter of hours, they write and record the classic track, Handle with Care.
They have so much fun that they decide to form a fake band where they all play half-brothers.
Orbison, maintaining his humble nature, picks the alias Lefty Wilbury, which was a sweet nod to his childhood country music hero, Lefty Frizzle.
Jeff Lynne, who acted as the primary producer for the Wilburys album, gave a fascinating interview about the dynamic in that garage studio. You have to remember, these were monumental rock stars.
Guys with massive egos who were used to selling out football stadiums.
Right. But Lynn said that when they were hanging out between takes, it was all jokes, beers, and eating dinner. But the exact second Roy Orbison stepped behind the microphone to record his vocal takes, Lynn described it as shutter time for all of them.
Shutter time!
These absolute legends would stop whatever they were doing, put their drinks down, and literally shiver in absolute awe of the instrument emanating from Orbison's throat.
While all this is happening, Orbison is simultaneously recording his solo comeback album, Mystery Girl, which was turning out to be a modern masterpiece.
He had a massive top 10 hit on his hands with the single, You Got It.
He was finally, after decades of suffering, back on top of the mountain. But to really appreciate why that mountain was his alone to climb, we need to spend some time talking about the actual mechanics of his legacy.
The architecture of his music.
Well, this raises an important question. How did a guy from the dusty plains of West Texas, with absolutely zero formal musical training, zero understanding of classical composition, manage to write some of the most structurally complex, bizarre, and enduring pop songs of the 20th century?
Because his songs simply do not follow the established rules of popular music.
Wait, before we go further, what does a normal pop song structure actually look like, and how exactly did Orbison break it? What does an unconventional structure actually sound like to the listener?
A standard pop song from the 1950s all the way to today relies heavily on repetition to hook the listener's brain.
Okay.
It goes verse, chorus, maybe a bridge, and then a final chorus. It's a comfortable, predictable loop. But Orbison didn't know how to write sheet music, and he didn't know the traditional rules of Nashville songwriting, so he simply didn't follow them.
He wrote based entirely on emotional instinct.
Exactly. Take a song like In Dreams. It doesn't repeat a single melodic section. It is built in 7 completely distinct movements, what a musicologist would call an ABCDEFG structure.
No chorus at all.
Right. It starts as a quiet, gentle lullaby, morphs into a marching rhythm, shifts into a soaring plea, and ends in a massive operatic crescendo. It evolves linearly, like a classical symphony, rather than looping like a pop song.
Or look at Running Scared, which we discussed earlier.
It has no chorus at all. None. It is just one continuous repeating verse that slowly gets louder, denser, and more tense until it finally explodes on that high A note.
Bernie Taupin, who is Elton John's legendary lyricist, noted that Orbison's songs always made these radical left turns that completely defied logic but made perfect emotional sense.
And that profound emotional instinct didn't just change music theory. It fundamentally changed the culture of masculinity.
How so?
We look at the historical context of the 1950s and early 60s. Rock and roll was defined by a posturing, aggressive machismo.
It was the era of Marlon Brando and James Dean.
It was all about rebellion, fast cars, leather jackets, and tough guys who didn't care about anything. Orbison completely subverted that entire paradigm.
He sang almost exclusively about deep, paralyzing pain, catastrophic loss, emotional devastation, and crippling insecurity.
He was a man who wasn't afraid to sound weak, to sound like he was begging. The Bee Gees specifically credited him with single-handedly making it culturally acceptable for men to sing openly about severe emotional heartbreak.
Bob Dylan had one of the best, most evocative quotes about Orbison's unique power. He said Orbison sang like a, quote, professional criminal and had a voice that could jar a corpse.
Dylan said that with Roy, you didn't know if you were listening to a Mexican mariachi band or grand opera, but the intensity of it made you want to drive your car over a cliff.
That specific level of dramatic life-or-death intensity was just unmatched by anyone else on the radio. Even his total lack of movement on stage, which we talked about earlier, became a legendary part of his mystique.
John Belushi famously parodied this on Saturday Night Live in the 70s.
Yes. He dressed up in the black suit and sunglasses, stepped to the mic as Orbison, started singing "Oh, Pretty Woman," and then just stiffly fell over backwards like a petrified statue while the SNL band members casually picked him up and stood him back up at the mic without missing a beat.
It's a hilarious physical gag, but it perfectly highlights how singular his energy was. He didn't need to jump around, smash guitars, or sweat through his shirt because the pyrotechnics, the absolute fire of his performance, were entirely contained within his throat.
I really want you to think about the concept of being uncool. Bruce Springsteen, in his Hall of Fame induction speech, summarized Orbison's enduring appeal by calling him the coolest uncool loser you'd ever seen.
Orbison took all the things that made him uncool in high school. The thick glasses, the intense shyness, the lack of athleticism, the overt emotional vulnerability, and he leaned into them.
He pushed them so far, and with such unwavering authenticity, that they became undeniably, timelessly cool.
It is a profound reminder to embrace whatever makes you unique, even if it goes completely against the current cultural grain or the expectations of your peers.
Your perceived weaknesses might just be the exact ingredients of your defining signature.
That is the most enduring lesson of his entire career arc. True authenticity will always outlast manufactured trends.
But sadly, this beautiful, triumphant 1980s comeback was cut tragically short. We arrive at December 1988. Orbison is 52 years old.
He is completely exhausted from an unrelenting, punishing schedule of recording the Wilburys album, filming music videos, completing his solo album, and doing a massive press tour in Europe.
On December 6th, he is back home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. He spends a completely normal, mundane day. He goes shopping for model airplane parts with a friend, has dinner with his family, and visits his mother.
Later that evening, he goes into the bathroom, and he doesn't come out.
He suffers a massive, instantaneous, fatal heart attack and passes away right there, literally on the precipice of his greatest solo triumph in 2 decades.
It is a heartbreakingly abrupt, quiet end to a life that was defined by such massive, dramatic, operatic arcs.
But the aftermath of his passing was incredibly triumphant. Just a month after his death, his solo single, "You Got It," hits the top 10 on the Billboard charts.
By April of 1989, Roy Orbison achieves a historic milestone. He becomes the first deceased musician since Elvis Presley to have 2 albums in the top 5 of the Billboard charts simultaneously.
The Traveling Wilburys album and his solo record, "Mystery Girl."
So what does this all mean?
We started this journey with a shy, vision-impaired kid from the dusty, oil-soaked plains of Texas. A kid who couldn't play high school football and hid his face behind a guitar.
And we end with a man universally recognized as the voice of God.
A man who proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that raw, unvarnished talent, coupled with the immense courage to be completely, devastatingly vulnerable, can outlast any fleeting musical trend or superficial cultural shift.
Looking back at his journey leaves us with a really fascinating paradox to consider.
What's that?
When you look at today's hyper-visual, brand-obsessed music industry, where every single artist's life is aggressively marketed, where their personal drama is curated on social media, and where you are expected to be accessible to your fans 24/7.
It's nonstop now.
Could an anonymous celebrity like Roy Orbison even exist today? Could someone stand completely still on a stage, hide their face entirely behind dark glasses, offer absolutely no personal drama for the tabloids to chew on, and still conquer the world based on the sheer, unadulterated merit of their heartbreak and their voice alone?
Wow. That is definitely something for you to think about the next time you turn on the radio or scroll through an artist's social media feed and see how performers are required to present themselves today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the extraordinary life and legacy of the legendary Roy Orbison. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will see you next time.